The sky was a sharp, unforgiving blue that morning, the kind of blue that left no shadows to hide in. The sun was already blazing above the training camp, baking the open field where rows of folding chairs had been set up. Dozens of people milled about, adjusting their caps, tightening their shoelaces, and sharing nervous chatter. The air carried that strange tension that comes before a test, excitement and fear swirling together. This was no ordinary day for the participants. Each of them had come here with something to prove. Some were eager to show off their strength, others their quick thinking, and still others their teamwork. The trainers, dressed in black uniforms with bright orange stripes, stood like watchful hawks on the sidelines. They weren't here for small talk. They were here to see who would crumble and who would shine. Among the eager faces, jokes, and restless bodies stood Emily Carter. She didn't look like she belonged. She stood at the very edge of the group, half shadowed by the large oak tree near the field's border. While others laughed loudly, comparing notes and boasting about past drills, Emily kept her arms folded tightly across her chest, her notebook pressed against her ribs like a shield. Her gaze was fixed on the ground, on a small pebble she shifted back and forth with her shoe. Emily was the kind of person most people barely remembered. In school, she'd sat quietly in the back, turning in assignments on time, never raising her hand, never asking for help. Even here, at the camp, she had been around for days, yet only a handful of participants knew her name. The rest referred to her vaguely as that quiet girl. She never pushed herself into the spotlight, and people were too busy chasing their own recognition to notice her absence from it. But Emily noticed everything. She always had. While others bantered loudly, she listened. While others rushed to show their eagerness, she studied the trainer's subtle frowns and small approving nods. Her silence wasn't ignorance, it was observation. And today, it would make all the difference. The camp itself buzzed with anticipation. Tables were lined with medical kits, dummy mannequins, ropes, stretchers, and other supplies. This wasn't just any training. It was the kind of exercise designed to push people to their limits. The whispers in the crowd confirmed as much. "I heard last year only 2 people passed," one man muttered. "Yeah, but this time I'm ready," another boasted, flexing his arms as though strength alone would save lives. Emily overheard it all, but she said nothing. Instead, she opened her notebook discreetly, flipping to a page where she had sketched out steps of CPR and airway management. She had copied it word for word from the manual she borrowed from the library weeks ago. Her handwriting was small, neat, and precise, as though she believed clarity might steady her nerves. She ran her fingertip along the notes, whispering silently to herself. Check responsiveness. Call for help. Open the airway. Start compressions at 2 inches deep, 100 per minute. She knew it by heart. But knowing something and standing before a crowd to prove it were 2 very different things. A sharp whistle blew across the field, snapping everyone's attention to the trainers. One of them, a tall man with a weathered face and a booming voice, stepped forward. His eyes swept across the group like floodlights, making even the most confident participants straighten their backs. "Today," he announced, "you will face the kind of chaos you cannot prepare for with theory alone. You will act fast, you will act under pressure, and you will act when fear grips you. This is not about perfection, it is about survival. When we call for a medic, you will respond. If you hesitate, if you crumble, people die. Understand?" A loud, "Yes, sir," echoed across the field. All except one voice, Emily's. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The trainer's gaze lingered on the group, a moment longer before he barked. "Positions." Chairs scraped against the dirt as participants scrambled. Emily followed slowly, settling at the end of the row. Her heart was already hammering. She knew what was coming, but she also knew she wasn't ready to put herself on display. She would watch, she decided. She would observe, as always, and maybe, just maybe, she would learn something useful. The first drill began suddenly, without warning. Casualty down. Severe bleeding. A trainer shouted, pointing to one of the dummies sprawled on the ground. Any medics here? Half a dozen hands shot up before the words finished echoing. Volunteers rushed forward, bumping into each other in their eagerness to prove themselves. The rest of the group leaned forward eagerly, cheering them on. Emily sat stiff, her notebook clutched tighter than ever. Her stomach twisted. She could see instantly what the volunteers were doing, wrong pressing too lightly, fumbling the bandages, wasting precious seconds. She wanted to call out, to correct them, but her throat locked up. Her voice was always the last to be heard, if at all. The trainers weren't merciful. Wrong technique. Failed, one barked after only a minute. The group groaned as the failed volunteer slunk back, face flushed red. Another casualty was announced. Another volunteer dashed forward. Another failure. It went on like this for hours. The bravest and loudest participants rushed to the field, only to return defeated, sweat dripping down their temples. Emily watched every attempt carefully, scribbling notes in her book when no one was looking. Too shallow compressions. Wrong hand placement. Hesitated on airway. Didn't delegate tasks. She could see the patterns, the mistakes, the causes of failure. But knowing wasn't enough. Her chest felt heavy as the failures piled up. People whispered among themselves now, their confidence beginning to fray. The atmosphere had changed. What had started as excitement was now edged with anxiety. The trainers' faces were unreadable, but Emily sensed their disappointment. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had practiced these techniques alone in her room, using pillows as makeshift patients. She had read every book she could find on emergency care, but she had never once spoken up. She was a shadow in the crowd, and stepping into the light felt impossible. Still, deep down, a strange feeling stirred a quiet storm. For the first time, Emily wondered, what if it had been real? What if lives truly depended on me? Could I still stand by and watch? Her hand trembled as she held her notebook tighter. She didn't know it yet, but the storm building inside her was about to break. The whistle cut through the air like a blade, shrill and merciless. The trainers didn't give anyone time to breathe, let alone prepare. One moment, the participants were sitting in uneasy silence, notebooks in laps, bottles of water clutched tight in sweating hands. The next moment, a voice roared across the training field. Casualties. We've got multiple casualties. The words snapped every spine straight. The crowd lurched to their feet, eyes darting toward the stretchers laid out at the far end of the field. There, half a dozen dummies had been staged sprawled across the grass in grotesque positions, faces pale, clothing marked with painted streaks of red to mimic blood. Some clutched plastic limbs bent at impossible angles. Others had tags taped to their shirts, unresponsive. Severe bleeding. Airway blocked. The trainers moved quickly, their boots pounding against the dirt as they circled the scene. One shouted again, his voice raw with urgency. Any medics here? The first cry seemed to freeze the air itself. For a split second, there was silence. Then, as if a dam had burst, volunteers rushed forward. I'll do it, shouted a tall man with broad shoulders, sprinting toward the closest dummy. His confidence radiated. The crowd murmured approvingly. Finally, someone decisive. But Emily's sharp eyes caught the mistake before the trainers even opened their mouths. The man knelt clumsily, fumbling with the medical kit, his hands too shaky to unroll the bandage properly. He pressed down on the wound, but far too lightly, hesitating as he looked back toward the trainers for approval. Too slow. Wrong pressure. Patient lost. One barked, ripping the man's attempt apart in seconds. The failure was met with a wave of groans from the group. The man's shoulders slumped as he trudged back, face burning. His friends tried to pat him on the back, but the sting of defeat was obvious. Another trainer pointed sharply. Next casualty. Breathing problem. Who's stepping up? A young woman with her hair, tied back in a tight braid, bolted forward. She looked more nervous than confident, but determination gleamed in her eyes. Emily recognized her. This was the same woman who had been loudly reciting textbook definitions during lunch the day before. The woman dropped to her knees beside the dummy, tilted its head back, and pinched its nose. She took a breath, then delivered a shaky rescue breath. Emily winced. The airway wasn't cleared. She knew what would happen. Sure enough, the trainer snapped. Blocked airway. You didn't check. Patient lost. The woman froze, color draining from her face, then stumbled back to the line, her determination dissolving into embarrassment. The cycle began. Again and again, the call rang out. Any medics here? And again, eager hands shot up. One participant after another threw themselves forward, determined to succeed where the others had failed. And one by one, they were torn apart under the trainer's watchful eyes. It wasn't that the group didn't know the theory. Most of them had studied the same way Emily had, through books, through drills, through practice on clean plastic mannequins. But here, in the chaos of raised voices, watchful peers, and the crushing weight of judgment, their knowledge unraveled. The crowd's energy shifted with each failed attempt. In the beginning, there had been confidence, even excitement. Cheers and encouragement had filled the air. But as the failures mounted, 3, 5, 7, 10, the cheers turned into whispers. Nervous glances darted across the line. People stopped volunteering so quickly. A few crossed their arms, muttering excuses under their breath. Emily sat stiff in her chair, her notebook closed, but pressed so tightly against her chest, it wrinkled the cover. Her heart thundered louder with every failure. Her eyes darted from the victims to the volunteers, catching every mistake. Her mind was screaming the corrections: check responsiveness first. Clear the airway before breaths. Don't waste time fumbling with equipment, delegate tasks. But her lips stayed sealed. She watched the 12th attempt unfold like a slow-motion nightmare. A young man with nervous sweat dripping down his face rushed to a dummy labeled unresponsive. He shook it weakly, muttered something unintelligible, and immediately began compressions, sloppy, uneven, off-center. Emily clenched her fists. He didn't even call for help. The trainer's voice exploded like thunder. Stop. Wrong sequence. Patient dead. The young man stumbled back, wiping his forehead with his sleeve, his confidence shattered. The trainer didn't soften the blow. He turned back to the group, his eyes hard and cold. 12 failures, 12. His voice carried across the field like a verdict. If this had been real, 12 lives would already be lost. He paused, letting the words sink in like heavy stones. Then louder, sharper, he shouted again. Any medics here? But this time, no hands shot up. The silence was deafening. The group, once buzzing with energy, now stood frozen. Some looked at the ground, avoiding the trainer's eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado stripped away. A few muttered excuses, claiming they weren't feeling well, or that they'd get the next one. But the truth was clear: fear had set in. Emily could feel it pressing on her chest like a weight. She could almost hear the ticking of a clock, the imagined heartbeats of those casualties fading with every passing second. Her palms were damp with sweat, her throat dry, but her mind was alive with steps. procedures, knowledge she knew she had mastered in private. And yet, her body refused to move. She sat frozen as the silence stretched, growing heavier, sharper, more suffocating with every moment. The trainer's disappointment was palpable. The crowd's uncertainty thickened into dread. And somewhere deep inside Emily, a storm was beginning to rise, small, quiet, but impossible to ignore. The unexpected crisis had begun, and it was only getting worse. The sun seemed harsher now, as if it too bore down in judgment. Heat shimmered above the training field, sweat dripping freely from the brows of the exhausted volunteers. One after another, they had gone forward, full of hope, only to return defeated, shaking their heads or hiding their faces in shame. The trainers hadn't softened once. They didn't pat shoulders, didn't offer gentle correction. Every mistake was announced sharply, publicly, as if carved into the very air. Too shallow, too slow, incorrect order. Patient lost. By the time the 12th attempt failed, the atmosphere was almost unbearable. Emily sat rigid, notebook still clutched against her chest, watching everything unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. She wasn't just witnessing mistakes, she was analyzing them, absorbing them, almost cataloging them in her mind. The first volunteer, strong and sure, had collapsed under pressure, his bandage wrapped loosely enough to fall away within seconds. Emily's thoughts had screamed silently. Secure the dressing firmly, use more pressure, don't pause. The second had failed to clear an airway before attempting rescue breaths, effectively suffocating the dummy. Emily's fingers had dug into her notebook. Always check the airway. Always. The third, shaking so hard his hands trembled uncontrollably, had fumbled the scissors meant to cut clothing, slicing his glove instead. He panicked, dropped the tool, and wasted half the precious time. The trainer's roar had nearly shaken the ground beneath their feet. Patient lost. Equipment mishandled. Failure. By the fourth attempt, Emily could already predict the rhythm of failure. She saw hesitation like a dark cloud settling on the volunteers' shoulders, weighing them down before they even began. By the fifth, the crowd's encouraging cheers had thinned to a few hesitant claps, quickly swallowed by silence. By the eighth, the only sounds were the trainer's orders and the ragged breathing of the volunteers. The ninth volunteer was a tall, confident woman who strode forward with fierce determination. Emily had leaned forward slightly, hoping, praying that maybe this one would succeed. She worked fast, her movements sharp, but her confidence blinded her. She skipped steps, neglected to call for assistance, and when she announced the patient stabilized, the trainer barked. Pulse not checked. You assumed life where there was none. Failure. The crowd had recoiled. The woman froze, disbelief etched on her face, then stormed back to the line, anger crackling in her wake. By the 10th, even the boldest were beginning to waver. Emily glanced around at her peers. Some stared at the ground, refusing to meet the trainer's eyes. Others whispered furiously among themselves, blaming the trainers for being too harsh, the dummies for being unrealistic, or the heat for clouding their minds. But Emily knew the truth. It wasn't the trainers. It wasn't the tools. It wasn't the weather. It was fear. Fear that every eye was watching. Fear of failure, of embarrassment, of being judged. And fear she knew was deadlier than any wound. The 11th volunteer stepped up, his face pale but determined. He moved mechanically, as though reciting steps he had memorized word for word. He checked responsiveness, called for help, began compressions. But his rhythm was erratic, too fast, then too slow. His hands slipped from the chest plate of the dummy. His breaths were shallow, uncertain. The trainer raised a hand sharply. Stop. Silence fell like a hammer. You panicked. You lost control. Patient lost. The man lowered his head, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat, and shuffled back. Finally, the 12th. The 12th volunteer was younger than most, perhaps barely out of school. His nervousness was plain as he rushed forward, lips pressed tightly together, sweat glistening along his temple. He muttered the steps under his breath like a prayer. Emily leaned in, her heart tightening. Check, call, compressions. But his hands were misplaced too high on the chest. His compressions were shallow, irregular. He stopped suddenly, glancing desperately toward the trainers, as though begging for a nod, some reassurance. None came. Instead, his panic deepened. He switched to rescue breaths, his form sloppy, his seal incomplete. The trainer didn't even let him finish. His voice erupted like thunder. Wrong hand placement. Inconsistent rhythm. Patient dead. The young man flinched as though struck. His face crumpled, his jaw tightened, and he stumbled backward, shaking his head over and over. He didn't even return to the line. He collapsed into a chair at the back, burying his face in his hands. And then there was silence. The kind of silence that isn't simply quiet, but heavy pressing on lungs, choking the air. 12 failures. 12 wasted chances. 12 lives lost in the space of an hour. The trainer stood tall, arms crossed, their faces hard as stone. They swept their eyes across the group like generals surveying a broken army. 12 attempts, one trainer said finally, his voice low but cutting. And 12 failures. If this had been real, 12 human beings would be dead at your hands. The words sent a shiver through the group. People shifted, uncomfortable, but no one argued. No one dared. The weight of failure was undeniable. Emily's heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might break her ribs. She could hear her thoughts screaming. I could have done it. I knew those mistakes. I knew what to do. Her lips parted, but the words refused to come. Fear held them back, the same fear that had crushed every volunteer before her. The trainer's voice rose again, sharp, commanding. Any medics here? The words echoed across the field. But this time, no hands rose. No one dared step forward. Some stared at the ground, others looked away. A few exchanged uneasy glances, silently daring one another to volunteer, but none moved. Confidence had drained from the group like water from a cracked glass. Emily gripped her notebook tighter. Her throat felt raw, as though the unspoken words inside her were burning. Her palms were damp with sweat, her body trembling but not with fear alone. Something else simmered beneath the surface, something she couldn't quite name. She looked at the mannequins, at their pale plastic faces smeared with fake blood. She imagined them real faces gasping, eyes begging, bodies failing. And she imagined herself standing there, frozen, watching them die. Her chest tightened painfully. No, not like this. Not forever. Still she sat, silent, waiting. The crowd shifted uneasily, the silence dragging on, stretching longer, heavier, until it seemed unbearable. The trainers scanned the group again, their disappointment sharp as knives. 12 failures had broken the spirit of the crowd. But for Emily Carter, the quiet girl at the edge of the field, those 12 failures had ignited something deeper, a fire she couldn't yet control, but one that refused to go out. The crisis wasn't over, and the storm inside her was only growing stronger. The silence after the 12th failure was worse than any shouted reprimand. It pressed down on the group like a suffocating blanket, heavier than the summer heat. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the trainers, so quick to bark orders moments ago, allowed the silence to stretch, letting it twist into a rope around every participant's neck. Emily sat at the far edge, her notebook pressed against her chest, as if it could shield her from the weight of the moment. Her fingers trembled against the warm cardboard cover. The smell of dust and sweat filled her lungs, thick and metallic, as though the air itself carried judgment. She could still see the last volunteer's face flushed, broken, eyes wide with humiliation as he stumbled back to the chairs. His failure wasn't just his own. It belonged to all of them now. 12 had tried. 12 had failed. And every second that passed only deepened the certainty that the next would too. The trainer's voice broke the silence like a crack of lightning. "Any medics here?" The words were the same, but this time they landed differently. They weren't a challenge anymore. They weren't a call for courage. They were a plea of desperate demand, hurled at a group that had already proven itself unworthy. Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought the trainers might hear it. Her mind screamed the steps over and over, louder than the voice outside. Check responsiveness. Call for help. Clear the airway. Begin compressions. Don't hesitate. Don't freeze. Don't fail. She knew it. She had practiced it. She had whispered the words in the quiet of her room, her pillow serving as a dummy, her imagination filling in the sounds of choking, of silence, of lives slipping away. She knew it. But knowledge was one thing. Standing here, in front of dozens of eyes, in front of trainers who had shredded every failure into dust, this was something else entirely. Her throat tightened. Her mouth went dry. She wanted to speak, to answer, to say yes I can, but fear gripped her like chains. Her thoughts spiraled. What if I step forward and fail like the others? What if they laugh at me? What if my voice shakes? What if my hands slip? What if I prove, once and for all, that I really am invisible, not because they ignore me, but because I don't belong? Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath shallow, uneven. Around her, the others avoided the trainer's gaze. Some looked at the ground. Some crossed their arms. One man even muttered, "This is rigged," though no one agreed. The truth was simpler. They were afraid. And their fear was contagious, infecting the air. Emily's gaze slid to the mannequins sprawled on the grass. She saw them not as lifeless dummies, but as real bodies. She imagined faces she knew, her younger brother, her best friend from childhood, her mother. She saw their chests still, their lips blue, their eyes pleading. And she saw herself sitting still, silent, letting them fade. Her nails dug into the cardboard cover of her notebook. No. The word rose inside her like a whisper at first. No, not like this. Not when I know what to do. Not when I can help. The silence stretched on, unbearable. The trainer's eyes swept across the group, hard and unyielding. Emily felt the storm inside her swell, pressing against the walls of her fear, demanding release. Her lips trembled. She lowered her gaze, her voice rising from somewhere deep, trembling but undeniable. I can try." The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the heavy air. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined speaking them at all. But then the heads turned. Every face in the crowd swung toward her, eyes widening in disbelief. The silence didn't break it, sharpened, cutting through her like a blade. Murmurs rippled instantly. "Her?" someone whispered. "The quiet girl? She's never even spoken before." A nervous chuckle rose from somewhere in the line, quickly silenced by the trainer's sharp glare. Emily's face burned. Her knees felt weak, as if the ground beneath her had tilted. She wanted to sink into the dirt, to vanish into the oak tree's shadow, to take back the words before they solidified. But it was too late. They were out there now, echoing in the open air. The trainers exchanged a glance. Skepticism flickered across their faces, but so did curiosity. One of them arched a brow, then jerked his chin toward the field. "Step forward." Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. She rose slowly, her legs trembling beneath her. Her notebook slipped slightly in her grip. She hesitated, then set it down carefully on her chair, as though leaving behind a part of herself. Each step toward the mannequin felt like crossing a battlefield. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her palms slick with sweat, but she kept moving. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Even the trainers didn't bark this time. They simply observed, arms folded, eyes sharp. She knelt beside the dummy, her knees pressing into the hard dirt. She inhaled deeply, willing her hands to stop shaking. The world narrowed. The murmurs of the crowd faded. The weight of the trainer's gaze dimmed. Even the burning sun above seemed to retreat. There was only her, the dummy, and the knowledge thrumming in her mind like a lifeline. Her fear didn't vanish, it clung to her like shadows. But beneath it, something steadier had taken root. Determination. She spoke again, this time louder, steadier, to no one in particular. I can try. And this time, there was no mistaking it. The moment Emily's voice carried across the training ground, the air seemed to crackle with disbelief. She had spoken before quietly, politely, in the safe confines of routine conversations. But this was different. This was a declaration, a challenge to the silence that had shackled everyone since the 12th failure. And now, as her words echoed, she wished she could reach out, grab them, and stuff them back down into her chest, where no one could touch them. But it was too late. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Heads whipped toward her, eyes narrowing or widening, jaws slack with surprise. A murmur rippled through the group like a restless tide. Some voices carried doubt, others scorn. Her? You've got to be kidding. She doesn't even talk to anyone. She's gonna crack in seconds. Emily's stomach twisted. She felt exposed, raw, as though the heat of the sun had peeled away her skin and left only trembling nerves. Her fingers curled and uncurled against her thighs, desperate for an anchor. The trainers, too, regarded her with mixed expressions. One, a tall man with a sharp jawline and a whistle hanging around his neck, folded his arms across his chest and arched a brow. His gaze wasn't cruel, but it was heavy, as though he were weighing her worth on a scale already tilted against her. The other trainer, older, his gray hair tucked neatly beneath a cap, watched her with a faint frown. Not dismissal, exactly, but skepticism born from years of disappointment. The younger participants weren't kind. A boy in a red hoodie, one of the earlier failures, scoffed and muttered loudly enough for those around him to hear. She's gonna embarrass herself worse than I did. His friend chuckled, though uneasily, perhaps remembering his own mistakes. Emily heard every word. They slashed at her resolve, thin as paper, threatening to tear it apart. She wanted to retreat, to return to her seat and pretend she hadn't spoken. Her chest ached with the weight of their disbelief. But she couldn't unstep the step she had already taken. She was kneeling beside the mannequin now, her palms pressed against her knees, her breaths shallow. The silence that followed the murmurs pressed down again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was thick with expectation, bristling with doubt. Are you sure? The gray-haired trainer asked finally, his voice measured but laced with disbelief. This isn't a game. If you're not prepared, it's better to step back. Emily lifted her eyes to meet his. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She swallowed hard, fighting the lump in her throat. She wanted to tell him everything that she had studied late in the night, that she had practiced until her arms ached, that she had dreamed of this moment, though she never believed it would come. But the words tangled inside her, clumsy and heavy. All she managed was a nod. The trainer studied her for a moment longer, his frown deepening. Then, with a sigh, he stepped back, gesturing toward the mannequin. Fine, Show us what you've got." The challenge hung in the air, sharp and cold. Emily's pulse roared in her ears. She adjusted her knees on the dirt and placed her trembling hands on the dummy's chest. Her fingertips brushed against the hard plastic, and for a fleeting second, she felt nothing but terror. The whispers from the crowd swelled behind her like a rising wave. "She's not going to last. Watch her mess this up. This'll be quick." Every word was a stone, weighing her down, pressing her chest tighter, threatening to crush the fragile spark of courage she had mustered. But somewhere beneath the fear, something flickered. It wasn't defiance, not yet, but a stubborn spark that whispered, "I have to try. I can't back down now." Her breath slowed. She closed her eyes for half a second, shutting out the noise, the heat, the stares. In the darkness, she pictured the diagrams she had studied, the videos she had replayed, until she could see every movement, even with her eyes closed. She remembered the feel of her pillow beneath her hands as she practiced compressions, the steady rhythm she had whispered to herself like a secret song. 1, 2, 3, 4. Steady, firm, don't lose count. When she opened her eyes again, the fear was still there, clinging to her ribs like a shadow. But it no longer ruled her. She leaned down, tilted the mannequin's head, and cleared the airway with practiced care. Her movements weren't flawless. Her fingers trembled slightly, her elbows too tense, but they were steady. She checked for breath, then positioned her hands over the chest. Her voice, quiet but clear, cut through the murmurs, starting compressions. The crowd fell silent. Emily pressed down, her shoulders over her hands, her arms locked, her palms driving into the chest with precise rhythm. The plastic gave way beneath her pressure, with the telltale click of proper technique. She counted silently in her head, each number a lifeline. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her muscles screamed almost instantly. She wasn't strong, not in the way the athletic volunteers had been. But she had learned that strength wasn't everything. It was technique, persistence, control. She kept going. The trainer's sharp eyes narrowed as he watched, but he didn't interrupt. The crowd, for once, was silent, their doubt pressed into uneasy quiet by the sight of the quiet girl refusing to crumble. Still, Emily felt the doubt around her like a storm cloud. She heard it in the sharp breaths behind her, sensed it in the skeptical gazes, felt it in the weight pressing against her back. Doubt wasn't gone. It was circling, waiting for her to falter, to stumble, to give it reason to laugh. But she didn't stop. Her breaths came harder, her arms ached, but she pressed on, steady and determined. The mannequin's chest rose and fell beneath her, the clicks of each compression echoing louder than the whispers had. For the first time since the exercise began, the trainers exchanged not skeptical looks, but something else interest. Emily didn't see it. She didn't hear the crowd shift from disdain to silence. All she felt was the steady beat of her own determination, louder than the doubt that surrounded her. Because doubt might fill the air, but inside her, something stronger was beginning to grow. The first 30 compressions felt like eternity. Emily's arms trembled under the weight of her own effort, her lungs burning from shallow breaths, but she didn't stop. Every press was a battle against her weakness, against the whispers of doubt that still clung to the back of her mind. She counted in silence, forcing her rhythm to stay steady, hearing the faint click beneath the mannequin's ribs that told her she was, at least, doing it right. But when she leaned back to give rescue breaths, something shifted. The trembling in her hands slowed. Her movements smoothed out. Her breath, though quick, carried certainty. The panic in her chest, so loud moments ago, softened into a distant hum, replaced by a focused clarity she hadn't known she possessed. It was as though the world narrowed to just two things: her and the life she was trying to save. "Airway clear," she murmured, her voice steadier now. She pinched the mannequin's nose, tilted its head, and delivered 2 measured breaths. The dummy's chest rose with each one exactly as it should. Behind her, the silence thickened, but it was no longer filled with scorn. It was heavier, expectant, as though the crowd was leaning in without realizing it, drawn by something they couldn't yet name. Emily went back to compressions. Her elbows locked, her shoulders aligned, her weight pressing down with precision. This time, her count wasn't just for her. It carried authority, spoken aloud so those behind her could hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The whispers had vanished. No one mocked her now. A girl from the back whispered softly, "She knows what she's doing." Emily didn't hear it. She was too deep in the rhythm, her mind recalling every diagram, every late-night practice session. Her fear had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it sharpened her focus, keeping her alert, aware, alive in the moment. Then it happened, the moment when she stopped being the quiet girl and became something else entirely. "Call for emergency services." She shouted suddenly, her voice carrying across the field. The command startled the group. For a second, no one moved, but then one of the participants scrambled for the practice radio, fumbling with it before shouting into it as if it were real. The shift was small, almost theatrical in the simulated drill, but it mattered. Emily had issued an order, and someone had obeyed. She didn't hesitate. "You grab the AED." "Over there, the red kit." Another participant rushed to the side, retrieving the defibrillator unit from its case. His eyes darted nervously to the trainers, as if asking if this was okay. The trainer didn't interfere. His gaze was fixed on Emily now, his usual sharp critique replaced by something unreadable. "Keep the area clear," she called. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was firm, clipped, carrying the authority of someone who had decided failure wasn't an option. For the first time all day, the drill field didn't feel chaotic. It felt coordinated. The crowd, once skeptical, began to shift. Some leaned closer, curiosity replacing scorn. A few even looked eager to assist, waiting for the next instruction. Emily worked swiftly, checking breathing, adjusting her compressions. When the AED arrived, she snapped it open with surprising confidence, attaching the pads with precise placement. The device's mechanical voice guided her, but it was Emily who commanded the space, her calm repeating its words with conviction. "Stand clear." Everyone stepped back without question. She pressed the button. The mannequin jerked faintly as the device simulated the shock. Emily didn't flinch. She went right back into compressions, her rhythm exact, her breaths even. And for the first time, the field felt alive with hope. The transformation wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic flourish or some cinematic miracle. It was subtle, unfolding second by second as Emily moved with steady purpose. The same girl who once hid behind her notebook now directed a group of peers, her voice guiding, her hands working, her presence anchoring them all. The trainers exchanged glances. The older one's frown had vanished, replaced with a slight nod of respect. The younger one, usually so quick to cut participants down, now stood silently, his arms unfolding, his posture straightening. The doubters in the crowd fell quiet. The boy in the red hoodie, who had scoffed at her before, now shifted uneasily, his jaw clenched. He had failed. She was succeeding. Still, Emily didn't notice them. Her world was narrowed to her task. She could feel the burn in her muscles, the ache in her back, the sweat dripping down her temples, but she pushed through. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the life in front of her, even if that life was only represented by a plastic dummy. Her mind whispered, "This is real. Treat it as real. Save them as if it were real." The minutes stretched long, but she never faltered. And then, suddenly, the trainer with the gray hair blew his whistle, sharp and piercing. The sound sliced through the air, signaling the end of the simulation. Emily froze, her palms still pressing down on Madigan's chest, her breath ragged. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. She couldn't. The silence that followed was deafening. She slowly lifted her hands, staring down at the dummy as though emerging from a dream. Her arms shook violently now, the adrenaline fading, the exhaustion flooding in. The world rushed back in voices, stares, the heat of the sun, the grass beneath her knees. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her throat dry, her body trembling. And then she heard it, clapping. It started softly, a single pair of hands from somewhere in the back. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the silence was replaced by the sound of applause, rolling over her like a wave. Emily's head jerked up, her eyes wide. The crowd was on their feet, clapping, some even cheering. Their doubt had shattered, their scorn burned away. They weren't mocking her anymore. They were looking at her with awe. The trainers didn't clap, but their silence was louder than any cheer. The gray-haired one stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his voice carried respect when he said, "That was textbook, calm, controlled, correct?" The younger trainer nodded once, slowly, his jaw tight but his eyes softer. Emily swallowed hard, her throat thick with emotion. Her face burned, her heart pounded, but her eyes shone with something new, something fierce. She wasn't invisible anymore. The girl who had whispered in hesitation was gone. In her place stood someone transformed. The echo of applause faded into the summer air, but Emily didn't let herself bask in it. Not yet. She knew the drill wasn't over. There were more victims sprawled across the grass, lifeless mannequins waiting for help. 12 had tried and failed to save them all. Now, unbelievably, the trainer's eyes were fixed on her, as though silently asking, "Can you do what no one else could?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. Sweat clung to her temples. Her arms still ached from compressions. But beneath the exhaustion, a steadier rhythm beat inside her chest resolve. She looked around at the sea of faces staring back at her. Some held admiration, some disbelief, but almost all of them looked lost. They were waiting for someone to lead. She inhaled sharply, pushed herself to her feet, and said, louder this time, "Don't just stand there, help me. We can save them all." Her words rang across the field like a command, not a plea. The crowd hesitated for only a second before movement stirred. A girl with her hair in a messy braid rushed forward first, kneeling beside another dummy. A tall boy followed, his face pale with nerves, but determination flickering in his eyes. Others shuffled closer, some reluctant, some eager. Emily knelt again, this time by another mannequin, her voice strong as she guided the girl at her side. "Check responsiveness. Good. Clear the airway. Yes, like that. Keep calm. You've got this." The girl nodded frantically, following instructions. Emily moved quickly to the next, scanning, correcting, directing. She was everywhere at once, her voice carrying, her eyes sharp, her movements certain. What once felt impossible now unfolded with startling coordination. You begin compressions. Keep your elbows straight. Count out loud so we can hear you. Perfect. Don't stop unless I tell you. You grab the kit. We need the airway mask. Hurry. You swap in when she tires. We don't stop compressions. One by one, participants who had failed earlier now moved with renewed confidence, guided by her voice. The hesitation that had plagued them dissolved. Where chaos once reigned, a rhythm began to take shape. The trainers watched in silence. Their arms folded, but their expressions unmasked. There was all there, yes. And something more. Respect. Emily pressed down on another mannequin. Her palms sore, her muscles screaming, but she didn't falter. She led by doing, showing them that fear had no place here. Her hair clung damply to her forehead, her breaths ragged, but her voice remained steady. Stand clear. She called as another AED delivered a simulated shock. The group stepped back instantly, no questions asked. For the first time, they moved as a unit. Minutes blurred into one another. The field buzzed with activity compressions, rescue breaths, equipment being passed back and forth, commands echoing in the air. Emily's voice rose above it all, anchoring them, guiding them, steadying them. And slowly, the impossible began to happen. One by one, each victim stabilized. The mannequins were lifeless plastic, yes, but in this moment, they symbolized something much larger, a chance to prove that teamwork, knowledge, and resolve could overcome failure. And Emily, the quiet girl who once sat invisible in the corner, was the one making it real. When the last mannequin had received compressions, shocks, and breaths, Emily finally leaned back, her arms limp at her sides, her chest heaving. Around her, the group mirrored her exhaustion, sweaty, trembling, but alive with energy they hadn't felt before. And then the whistle blew again. The piercing sound cut through the air, silencing the field. The older trainer stepped forward, his face unreadable. The younger one followed, his jaw set. For a moment, Emily feared they would tear apart everything she'd just done. But the older trainer's voice carried something different this time. Well done. The words were simple, but they landed like thunder. The group erupted into cheers, some collapsing onto the grass with laughter and relief, others clapping until their palms stung. A few even turned to Emily, grinning, nodding, as if to say, "You did it. We did it because of you." Emily's chest tightened, but not with fear this time, with something warm, fierce, and overwhelming. Pride. The younger trainer stepped closer, his sharp tone softened. "Do you realize what you just accomplished?" His gaze swept the field, then fixed on her. 12 tries, 12 failures. And yet somehow, you took the same group and made them succeed. That doesn't happen by accident. Emily blinked, her throat tightening. She wanted to respond, to explain that she had only done what she knew, what she had practiced, what she had feared she'd never get the chance to show. But the words stuck. So instead, she simply nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Around her, the group buzzed with energy. The girl with the braid clasped Emily's hand, squeezing it tight. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. The boy in the red hoodie, who had mocked her earlier, approached slowly, his face sheepish. He didn't speak, just gave her a short nod, his eyes lowered, as though admitting silently that he had been wrong. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Their respect was enough. She looked out across the field, her chest still rising and falling with heavy breaths. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She felt necessary. She felt strong. The trainers dismissed the group, but no one rushed to leave. They lingered, talking excitedly, replaying moments, laughing in relief. And at the center of it all was Emily, still quiet, still humble, but no longer unseen. Because today, she hadn't just tried. She hadn't just succeeded. She had saved them all. The field was quiet now, the chaos of the day reduced to the lingering hum of exhausted participants and the occasional rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything with a soft golden glow, the kind that made the sweat and grime of effort almost beautiful. Emily sat on the edge of the field, knees pulled to her chest, her notebook lying beside her. The pages were creased and smudged, filled with hurried notes and diagrams she had referenced all day, but they seemed almost irrelevant now. Today had proven that knowledge alone was not enough. Courage, determination, and action mattered even more. Her muscles still ached from the hours of compressions, her hands sore and palms raw, but the exhaustion carried with it a strange exhilaration. Every fiber of her being had been tested, and she had not faltered. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and fear, and she had acted anyway. Around her, the group lingered in small clusters. Voices were quiet now, reflective, tinged with awe. Participants who had once mocked or ignored her now offered small nods, shy smiles, or whispered thanks. The boy in the red hoodie, the one who had laughed at her hesitation earlier, approached cautiously. You were amazing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think anyone could pull it together like that. You saved us all." Emily felt her chest tighten. She wanted to shrug, to dismiss it, but the words sank into her. It wasn't just praise, it was acknowledgement. For the first time, someone had truly seen her, beyond the quiet demeanor, beyond the shadows where she usually hid. The older trainer approached next, his usual stern expression softened. He crouched beside her, studying her hands and the sweat-stained ground. "Emily," he said, his voice low but filled with something rare. "Respect. You didn't just perform the drill. You led it. You took a group that had failed 12 times and guided them to success. That's not luck. That's skill. That's courage. That's leadership." Emily looked up at him, blinking. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Leadership? Courage? These were words she had read in books, admired in stories, but never associated with herself. She had always been the quiet one, the observer, the girl who didn't speak unless necessary. And yet, here she was. She started, but paused. Her voice caught, unsure. She didn't know how to explain the fire that had ignited inside her today, the way fear had turned into focus, the way hesitation had become determination. "I just did what I had to do," she murmured. The trainer nodded knowingly. And that was enough. More than enough. Emily glanced back at the field, at the mannequins that had once seemed so lifeless, now symbols of the challenge she had overcome. She remembered each failure she had witnessed, each nervous, fumbling attempt, and she realized something profound. Today had been about more than saving dummies. It had been about facing fear, acting despite doubt, and discovering the strength she didn't know she had. The other participants approached her, forming a small circle of admiration and curiosity. They asked questions not about theory, not about the steps, but about her. How had she stayed calm? How had she known what to do? How had she been so sure when everyone else faltered? Emily didn't answer all of them. Some questions didn't need answers. The truth was simple. She had listened, she had observed, and she had acted. Her preparation had mattered, but so had her choice to step forward when no one else would. As the trainers called the participants together for a debrief, Emily remained seated for a moment longer, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The golden light spilled over the field, casting long shadows and illuminating the sweat-streaked faces of her peers. She saw pride there, and relief, and a newfound respect for her and for each other. Her mind wandered back to the beginning of the day, to the 12 failed attempts she had watched in silence. The memory of those failures no longer stung. It fueled her. Without them, she might never have risen to the challenge. Without them, she might never have discovered the strength that had lain dormant inside her all along. She picked up her notebook, running her fingers over the notes and diagrams, now smeared and folded from the day's chaos. This notebook, once a private sanctuary of study, had been a bridge to action. It had reminded her that preparation, observation, and persistence could turn fear into something powerful. The trainers dismissed the group, and participants began filing out, chattering excitedly about the day's events. Emily remained seated for a few moments longer, savoring the stillness, the quiet triumph. She had faced the storm of doubt, hesitation, and fear, and she had emerged on the other side, not just unbroken, but transformed. A gentle hand rested on her shoulder. She looked up to see the younger trainer, the one who had watched her silently through the day. His expression was serious, but kind. "You've changed today, Emily, not just for yourself, but for everyone here. They'll remember this day because of you." "And so will I?" Emily nodded, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She realized that being quiet had never meant being powerless. Strength wasn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it was calm, steady, and unassuming, exactly like her. As she stood and stretched, she looked at the field one last time. The golden light bathed the grass, the mannequins, and the remnants of chaos in a peaceful glow. The day had tested her in ways she never imagined, and she had risen above it, not for recognition, not for applause, but because it was the right thing to do. And in that moment, she understood something important. Heroism didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it waited quietly for the right moment to act. And sometimes that quiet hero could save them all. Emily picked up her notebook and slung it over her shoulder. She walked toward the exit, head held high, the world suddenly feeling larger, brighter, and full of possibilities. The quiet girl was gone. In her place walked a hero, one who had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. And everyone who had witnessed her today would never forget it.